it's wonderful to see so many people out there, and just welcome to this webinar that we're going to hold today. We think this is going to be a really energizing discussion that will hopefully spark connections and add momentum towards this collaborative path forward on what we're calling regenerative landscapes. It's just a great time for this. So I want to talk a little bit about 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people. I work for EcoAgriculture Partners, who is the convener of 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people. So we're a collaboration of change agents, let's call them that, working together to accelerate landscape efforts and sustain and restore ecosystems, build prosperity, and confront climate change. I feel like we've emerged in the years as a trusted name in fostering integrated landscape management. We work at two different levels. One, at the systemic level, working with finance and policy and communications and advocacy. And then there's also a level that we work and develop some really amazing pragmatic tools to support landscape partnerships. I feel like we're positioned as an essential catalyst in the landscape movement. And I feel that Regen 10 is an essential catalyst in the regenerative ag space. So this work coming together is highly complementary. And I think that's it's been highly generative. And I really welcome this. My personal journey has come to the conclusion that to be truly regenerative, a landscape perspective is absolutely necessary. So I wanted to take a few moments and talk about maybe if you're not so entrenched in the world of landscapes, what a landscape is. I could talk for hours about this, but a landscape is a dynamic social ecological system that blends natural, human-altered lands and waters. It's shaped by common ecological processes, histories, economies, and cultures. It's the people, it's the landscape. It can be a bioregion, it can be jurisdictional, it could be a combination of both. But what the challenge we're trying to address is how to integrate this mosaic of urban centers, natural areas, and the rural areas in between that are often dominated by agriculture into a thriving, interconnected whole. We focus a lot on this concept of landscape partnership, which is a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral group of people that comes together to build and maintain the health of their landscapes. We need to include all sectors, and the agriculture sector is absolutely essential to be part of a landscape partnership in terms of having farming organizations, market actors should be key stakeholders in this process. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about define the term integrated landscape management. I think you'll hear that several times today. It's a process. It's a way for managing a landscape over time to achieve sustainability and the four returns: a return on inspiration, social returns, economic returns, and natural returns. It's a structured process, like I said, that builds the landscape partnerships, develops a shared vision, develops an action plan, implements that plan, and then learns. And what 1,000 Landscapes is all about is nurturing the journey of those landscape partnerships through that ILM wheel that I just went over there. So that's kind of where we're at. I feel like there's this essential relationship between regenerative agriculture and landscapes. In order to have a healthy landscape, you need a healthy agricultural system. And the regenerative movement right now is meeting the landscape movement in a very powerful way, I think. And this talk that you're going to hear about today will provide an introduction to you for that. So the land that is used within a landscape and how the agriculture ag farms are situated in the landscape, it requires thoughtful integration between agriculture and natural systems. And if you do it right, it can create mutual benefits for healthy ecosystems and strong communities. It can support farms, while regenerative agricultural practices can enhance water quality, biodiversity, and local economies. So the paper that you're going to hear today, we're going to go into more detail on this, but hopefully that provides a little bit of background on these key concepts of what a landscape is, what a landscape partnership is, and integrated landscape management. And so I look forward to hearing all the ideas that we discussed today, and you as influential leaders in the regen ag and ecology communities, and how you can effectively work with the landscape world. So consider 1,000 Landscapes as an entry point into landscapes. And I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much to all the amazing speakers. And I'll hand it back to you, Shannon.
Thanks, Tom. And I will hand it over to Tara, who will introduce Regen 10 for us. Hi, welcome, Tara, as well as Valentina from Regen 10.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks, Tom, as well, for that introduction. I'll tell you a little bit about Regen 10 and what we've been working on. Regen 10 is a global multi-stakeholder initiative supporting an inclusive, regenerative, and equitable food systems transition. 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people has been a partner of Regen 10 since around the middle of 2023, and we're delighted to have collaborated on this white paper and other areas of work as well. Together with our partners and our network, we build momentum for climate and people-positive food systems by convening, collaborating, and driving co-learning. But food systems transformation tends to be fragmented. Different actors have different definitions and different priorities. The forthcoming Regen 10 Outcomes Framework offers a guiding star, allowing food systems actors and aligning them around what success looks like, both at farm and landscape levels. The framework provides a farmer-centric, holistic, multi-stakeholder aligned approach to regenerative and agroecological food systems, not by prescribing specific practices, but by defining shared outcomes. The framework supports context-based assessments, ensuring that regenerative transitions are locally relevant, while providing a shared vision for collaboration across diverse actors around holistic outcomes, enabling co-learning and the co-development of transition strategies. But knowing what is not enough. We also need the how, which my colleague from Regen 10 and the Meridian Institute, Valentina, is going to touch upon right now. Valentina, over to you.
Thanks, Tara, and hi everyone. Good to see you all and good to see so many friendly faces. So we know that transforming food system requires clarity on two things. First, what we're aiming for, and second, how we're actually going to make it happen. And the Regen 10 Outcomes Framework that Tara was talking about helps define what regenerative success looks like, establishing clear, farmer-centric outcomes across environmental, social, and economic dimensions. But we know that outcomes alone aren't enough, right? We need the right structures to drive the transition. And this is where mechanisms like landscape partnerships really come in, helping to mobilize collaboration, unlock finance, and shape policies that make regenerative outcomes actually achievable at scale. And as you'll hear more about, these landscape partnerships bring together farmers, businesses, policymakers, communities to connect agriculture, ecosystems, and policy for this large-scale regeneration. And they operate really at an exciting scale, which sits above the farm level, but below the bioregional level. And we know that regeneration isn't just about one individual farm transitioning. It requires entire landscapes to transition together and to deliver on the positive landscape level outcomes. They also help address some of those big challenges that are facing the food system transformation by bringing together diverse stakeholders to align efforts, advocate for long-term investment, and strengthen governance and coordination across those sectors. And at Regen 10, as Tara mentioned, we're working really to kind of connect those dots. So we've already launched our Regenerative Landscape Initiative map, which identifies and links some of the regenerative landscapes that exist worldwide. And through our transition pathways work, we've developed an open access tool to help landscapes quantify the cost of transitioning, really making it easier for them to plan and advocate for their financing needs. And while the forthcoming Regen 10 Outcomes Framework provides that shared vision, right, by defining what the regenerative outcomes that we're working towards, we're really excited about this landscape partnership strategy that Regen 10 created alongside our partner, 1,000 Landscapes for a Billion People, because it highlights why landscape partnerships are a necessary approach for achieving those outcomes set in the framework. And it outlines key areas, things like collaboration, finance, and policy that really need to be strengthened in order to support them. So to truly transform food systems, we need to elevate landscape-based approaches. And that's a lot of what you'll hear about today in our conversations, and ensuring that they receive stronger recognition, governance, and financing needs. By recognizing really that landscape partnerships are a vital part of food system transformation and ensuring that they are prioritized in policies and investment strategies, we really can move beyond fragmented and siloed efforts towards more systemic shift that enables regeneration at scale. And ultimately, what we all know is that no single actor really can drive this transition alone. And this is an ongoing conversation, and we're really excited about the launch of this white paper to really come into the public domain. And so we invite really everyone, farmers, policymakers, businesses, investors, to work with us in scaling and strengthening regenerative and agroecological approaches through mechanisms like landscape partnerships. Because we know really that only by working together can we actually turn ambition into action and build that food system that really truly works for people, nature, and climate. So with that, I'll pass back to Shannon.
Great. Thanks, Valentina. We're doing wonderful on time, so I'm putting it into the universe to continue that. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Sarah Shear, who will share a bit more in depth about the outcomes from the white paper before we invite our panelists to speak. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. I spent half my life really as a policy economist doing research on the challenges for achieving simultaneously abundant food production, community food security, and stable ecosystems and biodiversity. About 25 years ago, I realized that the only solution was to integrate these goals at a landscape scale. You can't solve them all at the farm level. You can't solve them all at the national level. And we're all navigating rapid changes in markets, in demography, in climate, and in our degrading ecosystems. And these are deeply interconnected. So we need new kinds of voluntary partnerships to allow us, new institutions, to provide platforms for clear-eyed analysis, for collaborative innovation, and for hard-headed thinking. Regenerative agriculture and agroecology have always been at the heart of landscape regeneration in most parts of the world, and landscape partnerships must be at the heart of a sustained global agriculture and food systems transformation. Numerous solutions are needed from so many actors. Landscape partnerships can provide the critical local integrator for those actions. Let's move to the next slide. Let's see, it's not, here we go, sorry. Let me go back. All right. When 1,000 Landscapes joined Regen 10 in 2023, among other work, we were invited to produce a comprehensive white paper about what all the 1,000 landscape partners have collectively learned about how to scale regenerative agriculture and food systems through landscape partnerships. The writing itself was led by myself, my colleagues Louise Buck and Bemi Granados from EcoAgriculture Partners, but the paper draws heavily on the experience of numerous 1,000 landscape partners and from collaborative activities and the development we had of the transformation strategy for 1,000 landscapes over the last 5 years. Other Regen 10 partners who have deep landscape experience also contributed. And some of the key findings from it are illustrated by a set of sort of concrete cases that were prepared by partners, and the distribution of those is shown here. Just as Tara and Valentina highlighted earlier, the transformation to regenerative agriculture and agroecology is urgent to address the global polycrisis. Indeed, such transformation is a central goal of most landscape partnerships. I'll let you, nothing new for most of the people here. And collaborative landscape action can accelerate this regenerative food system transformation in 5 key ways. First of all, by uniting efforts to achieve more ambitious goals across a whole landscape, bioregion, watershed, territory, whatever you want to call it. Secondly, by promoting wise stewardship of the ecosystems that farmers and their communities rely on to sustain food production and healthy lives, as well as thriving nature. Third, by mobilizing a network of allies from different sectors across the landscape that can support one another in advancing that holistic vision for the future. It's a political one. Fourthly, by supporting farmers, agribusiness, and other food system actors to manage the complexity, risk, and costs operating in their landscapes. And fifth, by providing a continuous voluntary platform for negotiation, for dialogue around resource governance as conditions change over time. The benefits from landscape partnerships can be quite concrete for food systems transformation. This is sort of illustrated in this graphic here. Most partnerships work on fostering the design and adoption of improved farm practices. They help to coordinate market infrastructure development, design incentives for farmers and market actors to make the transition. They can build on local culture to promote the consumption of more sustainably produced food and fiber. Many other examples in the paper. And the benefits, this graphic illustrates how empowered landscape partnerships which bring together stakeholders from different sectors, can help to identify and mediate the connections between local and global food systems. You see this in a number of cases. Section 2 of the white paper illustrates an idealized landscape partnership, more for those who are not so familiar with the concept and the model. Section 3 of the paper describes the actions that partnerships have to take, basically that all partnerships, no matter how unique and diverse they are, basically they have to do a couple of key things. First of all, they need to they're the organizational tasks. The conveners, the facilitators, and the distributed leadership in a landscape partnership need to build those connections together. They need to develop a shared understanding of the conditions, risks, and opportunities in the landscape. They need to develop a collaborative vision, goals with very measurable goals, and a long-term strategy to reach them. And then they need to craft a series of short-term action plans to move toward those goals. And finally, they need to help mobilize financing to implement the action plan, and they need to continuously be monitoring the impacts and learnings to keep adapting the plan. But also, landscape partnerships need to think a whole lot about finance from the very beginning, not just to sustain the work of the partnership itself, but for the projects and businesses in the action plan, the farmers, the businesses, community projects, government programs, etc., build infrastructure, green infrastructure. These come together to enable regeneration at scale in the landscape. Some financial resources are already there and just need to be aligned. But typically the financing is not only inadequate, it's also quite chaotic. Each project or business is kind of on its own. There's no mechanism to take advantage of the synergies among different projects and businesses or to avoid working at cross purposes. Landscape partnerships can potentially play a critical role in evaluating what the financial needs are and the financial opportunities are, and develop a strategy to access resources across the capital continuum, from philanthropy, from grants, from loans, from businesses, equity, insurance. They can be proactive in attracting funders, but at this moment, most of them do not have the capacity or the necessary support to do that effectively. The white paper draws on all the learnings, collective learnings from 1,000 landscapes, to propose a two-part action agenda to realize the full potential of landscape partnerships in regenerative agriculture and food systems transformation. They lie at the center of this figure. The first set of 5 key services that are in the inner circle are about ways in which we can build and strengthen landscape partnerships. Those in the outer circle will strengthen the key institutions to leverage that success at scale. And we're here today to start a conversation about how influential leaders in different parts of the regenerative agriculture and food systems community can help to mobilize this agenda. So let me run through the key points of it. The first part of the agenda to directly support them has 5 components. The top priority identified in all of our consultations is to fund strong community-led partnerships over the long term. That could be through philanthropic support, through government support, through company support, through grant funds and endowments or trusts, lots of different ways, but we need to make this institutionalized. The second dimension is to strengthen landscape support programs, whether provided by governments, NGOs, landscape networks. Specialized programs are needed, like procurement contracts for products from regenerative agricultural systems or private farm extension programs. The third key area of direct support is to accelerate learning about regenerative agriculture and landscape management. We need learning networks among landscape partnerships. We need to develop information technology that meets their particular needs, and we need to promote science and research focused on their problems. A fourth key action is to set up financial services to advise and work with landscape partnerships. This could be consultancy services, financial intermediation, landscape finance accelerators, designing fit-for-purpose financial mechanisms and instruments, and incubation services for regenerative enterprises. And the fifth service is to support national coalitions of landscape partnerships who are beginning to join together for learning and for advocacy. This can be done through seed funding for the coalitions, through government endorsement and collaboration, and through budget support. Let me illustrate a few of these with some of the work that 1,000 Landscape Partners have been doing over the last few years. First of all, we've worked with national landscape leaders in Kenya to establish the Kenya Landscape Actors Platform, KenLAP. This is a coalition of now nearly 100 landscape partnerships from mountain, coastal, and dryland regions who are working together for group training, for policy advocacy, and are beginning to plan impact assessments. Landscape leaders from Malawi, Tanzania, and Ethiopia have contacted KenLAP to get their advice on forming national networks in their own countries. And meanwhile, other coalitions associated with 1,000 landscape partners, like the Latin American Model Forest Network and Common Land, have been forming coalitions in Spain, Brazil, and beginning in Colombia. Meanwhile, at least 72 landscape partnerships and multiple networks are already using the 1,000 landscape learning modules that were made public late last year to guide leaders in their work. These modules, which encompass that whole element, all those elements in the circle that you saw before, were developed from members' best collective practices and incorporating them into a common, user-friendly, local adapted framework. Another core service of 1,000 Landscapes is our digital platform, Terrasso, which is bringing the information technology revolution to landscapes. Their apps are already helping 138 partnerships to produce multimedia stories, sometimes in just a few hours, manage data like tracking on-farm agroforestry plantings, and collaborate to map boundaries. These save landscape partnerships time, money, and foster partner collaboration. And another example of a service is the 1,000 Landscape Finance Accelerator, an expert advisory service with jointly developed tools and resources that help landscape partnerships assess their financing needs and develop a strategic financing plan. Such plans have been developed from Alto Mayo, Peru, to Mount Mulanje, Malawi, centering transformation to agroecology and regenerative agriculture. The next step is to help the partners build such teams that can work all around the world. The second part of the action agenda is to mobilize these key levers for enabling institutions. First, farmer organizations need to play a leading role in landscape partnerships to ensure serious, informed attention to food and agriculture issues. For that to happen, secondary and tertiary farmer organizations need to educate their members about landscape regeneration and how they can best organize to influence, contribute to, and mobilize these landscape partnerships. Secondly, businesses sourcing from landscapes need to invest and become active long-term members of landscape partnerships. To do so, they'll need to reinforce their own capacities, tools, and internal processes to do that, and to align that with their programs of corporate social responsibility. Business schools and other business experts need to learn and serve the landscape partnerships. Next, organizations across the capital continuum need to shift financial flows from standalone short-term projects to regenerative agriculture and landscape investments. This means developing new financial services, new kinds of finance instruments, and it calls for coordinating sectoral financial flows to invest in the projects that have been endorsed by landscape partners. At the same time, government policymakers and planners need to center landscape partnerships and action plans in policymaking. That means decentralization. It means creating programs and services for landscape partnerships. It means aligning the work of different sectoral agencies. And it means aligning financial action. And finally, all of these actors need to align their outreach to raise awareness and inspire action around regenerative agriculture and landscapes, and help landscape partnerships to tell their own stories. Again, we have a number of examples from work of 1,000 Landscapes that have tried to illustrate and pilot some of these efforts. We've been doing a lot of work for a number of years now in terms of joint policy awareness and advocacy with the conferences of the parties of the UN conventions on climate, land degradation, and biodiversity, and convenings on food systems. 1,000 Landscapes has supported landscape partnerships to tell their own stories through multimedia, a series called Landscapes in Action, and another one called Hope Springs that was produced for the UN Convention on Climate Change together with UNDP that highlighted cases in Niger, Australia, Spain, and South Africa. In 2023, 1,000 Landscape hosted a series of dialogues among 175 landscape and finance leaders. Together, they generated an action agenda of 11 specific action areas to advance landscape finance. And since a number of those actions have begun to move through collaborative work. And the last example is that 1,000 Landscapes has convened agriculture industry leaders to identify their priorities for engaging with landscape partnerships more effectively and collaborating with partners like CDP, Landscale, ISEAL, and the Loudest Foundation to support these companies. So we close the report with a call to action to influential leaders in the regenerative agriculture and food systems community. You are the policymakers, philanthropists, financiers, business leaders, researchers who are in a position to support this action agenda. We know that everybody can only do a part of the work, and that Regen Ag organizations are already working super hard on their sector agendas. But we think that by aligning around a common framework, we can all do far more, be more strategic and more impactful, and move more quickly. 1,000 Landscapes will be organizing follow-up dialogues around the various actions, and we really look forward to hearing the ideas of the panelists and all of you all who are here today on how to bring these actions to scale. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to hearing the panels. Bye.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. And now we will move on to the next component of our webinar, which is a few panel discussions. I would encourage anyone, we're going to share some questions and have our panelists respond, but I would also encourage anyone who is participating in the webinar to share their reflections on those questions as well in the chat. And as I said, my colleagues Bemi and Reka will be aggregating those reflections to share once the webinar is finished. But I'm going to turn it over right now to our first panel and our moderator, Pemo. Can you just quickly introduce yourself and then you're welcome to get started.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Sarah, and the earlier speakers. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know it's late or early for some of you. My name is Pemo Homoto. I'm with UNDP. I work in the part of UNDP that supports governments to access environmental finance to implement globally agreed multilateral environmental agreements, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, on climate, on land, and many others in between. Thank you again for joining us. So for this part of the session, we are going to hear landscape perspectives. So from those that are working at the landscape level or with landscape actors and partnerships, to hear their perspectives on what they think of what they just heard from the previous speakers and what they've read from the paper, to get a sense of whether these are making sense for them. Are they advancing the agenda that they engage with at the local level? So we have 3 panelists in this session. Gustavo Rojas from Rainforest Alliance, Mexico, Andrea Porro from Wild Farmers Organization, welcome, and Caroline van Leenders, who works on nature finance, RVO in the Netherlands. And we also have Louise Bach, who was on standby to support, also with answering some of the questions. She was a co-author of the paper. So panelists, you've heard the previous speakers, you've read the paper, you work on these issues on the ground with different partners, either in a representation mode role or with directly with actors that are trying to effect change on the ground. So what insights can you share from your own work and experiences that can enrich these recommendations that have just been made or that have been made in the paper to enrich the the findings and recommendations and actions that can be taken by all those that are supporting landscape action and regenerative practices on the ground. I will start with you, Gustavo. Could you please share your perspective from experiences in Mexico? Thank you.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel, and congratulations for the white paper. Very interesting, very rich. Yes, as a Rainforest Alliance, we've been working with all the several stakeholders along the supply chain. And what we see is that for regenerative landscapes to succeed, we need a lot of data at the landscape level. Right now, these companies that we work with, they make their sustainability commitments mainly at the farm level or the product level. And one of the recommendations that I found very interesting was the 7th one, that was about mobilizing resources for the landscapes and to source the agricultural products from how to make them more sustainable. So what we see is that a reliable and credible data about impact at landscape level, it's very important for these companies and businesses to make decisions. Why they would source from these areas, how they prove that they're actually regenerative or not, how they compare these sourcing areas from one to another. And we see that without trusted data and verifiable data, it's hard to prove also impact and attract long-term buyers in these landscapes. So that's why from RA, we started to reflect on these questions, and we think it's very important to advance this sustainability verification at the landscape level as something very important for businesses to take different decisions. So that's why we developed the landscape framework, which is a tool to assess and monitor impact at the landscape level and generate data and robust data that can help these businesses and companies on their ESG reporting. And we see also that landscapes partnerships, they struggle to show how they're creating impact at the landscape level. So that's why we think also that a standardized tool can also attract long-term funding with this data and corporate buy-in for the landscape partnerships. And it's also, we've seen it on the landscape partnerships about how this information can really give transparency to dialogue between the companies, but also the farm leaders and academic institutions that are working on the landscape partnerships. So that's also a reason why we think that data, it also improves this dialogue that it's taking place at the landscape level.
Thank you, Gustavo. Andrea, Paulo, I'll come to you. Your organization works with many farmers. So beyond data, I assume this data is also important for your network. But beyond data, what else is there that we should be thinking about when we advance this agenda on regeneration and landscape partnerships? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good day, everyone. Well, we have heard from Sarah, and definitely this approach discussed today is promising because it prioritizes a holistic community-led landscape partnership rather than models designed primarily for an angle that see everything as a part of a supply chain, not of a value chain where the balance of power and equilibrium. However, clarifying conceptual frameworks, identifying associated challenge is still crucial to assessing its applicability and ensure replicability across diverse socio-political and economic contexts. There is, and we hope that with Regen 10 we can put a fixed moment, still this interchangeability of use of terms like regenerative and agroecology that for the farmer community creates ambiguity. And obviously the implement also, it is reflected in the policy and implementation of it, what is at the root of these terms. Because for us, as a broader public, when we become regenerative agriculture is also the frame as a climate solution. But for our constituency, the farmers and their organization, is primarily an economic decision. And global governance model must reflect the local farming realities and avoid one-size-fits-all. On the data comment, obviously, it's something that is very much felt by farmers and their organization that see this both a challenge and an opportunity. I had the pleasure to discuss with several of our constituencies that are global north and global south alike in the World Farm Organization. And there is this huge debate today if are data a tools, are data a crop for farmers? Meaning, of course, it's part of the interest of all farmers to measure, because if you don't measure, you cannot set objective and be incremental. But at the same time, if that data is felt as an imposition and serves someone else, then farmer will hope that become a crop, so a product that is also rewarded for the work that farmer does to keep that measuring. All in all, and I'm going towards a bit of a conclusion to foster then the discussion, we are also in a specific yet very uncharted water situation where we have seen all the external pressure that are keep pushing on farmers. Rising inflation, trade duties, conflict in energy supplies, and not only, geopolitical instability, direct impact how this model function across different contexts. This reality must be factored into recommendations and so the relevance in both the global north and global south. As WFO, we see in this space the role, and as already mentioned and really appreciated from us, that farmers as co-leaders, which is well acknowledged, farmers and their organization, but governance mechanism must be robust enough to prevent power imbalance. And that for us, how do we ensure that farmers have an equal voice, comes from integrating accountability measures such as public reporting, independent oversight, and rotating leadership could help prevent elite capture. Last but not least, and I will conclude on this, for us, and we never cease to advocate and flag, the transition to a regenerative practice, a regenerative framework, must be financially viable. Today, without stable income and market incentives or financial risk sharing mechanism, adoption will be slow. So many times our farmers have flagged the fact that even I do believe in that sweet spot that stays between the economic, environmental, and social sustainability, that still it is the goal, because many of our farmers will keep saying that I'm not renting the land, I'm borrowing the land from my children. But still they say, if I struggle to meet ends, then where is for me the space to change, even if I believe in the regenerative approach or the sustainable approach. So that's where we see today. So ensuring that farmers can have a fair living while improving landscape is still at the center and must be at the center of our vision. And it sure it is at the center of WFO. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I'll go straight to you, Carolyn. You work on some of these finance issues, actually, when it comes to landscape transformation and food systems transformation. What are your perspectives, please? Thank you.
Well, I would like to echo the other people. Thank you for inviting me, and great to be here. Yes, I have been running a small program on bringing biodiversity in the financial sector for the last 10 years. And I would like to share some of our experiences. What we see with the front runners in the financial sector is that they are becoming more and more interested to combine everything that they've been doing on climate with what they are doing on nature. And one of the big topics we see popping up is climate adaptation. Climate as adaptation as the marriage between climate and nature. If we look at climate change, one of the things it does is that it really changes the water cycle, especially. And that is very different in the different parts of the world. So sometimes too much water, sometimes too little water. And if you start to think about how to invest differently in all kinds of water situations, you have to take a landscape approach, as you have to do with all kinds of nature ambitions that you have. We see the rise of awareness in the financial sector on combating nature loss. Financial institutions have to start to make transition plans for nature to really think how they can mitigate their risks, but also invest with a positive impact. We gave a little assignment to, which is now going to be picked up by the Global Environmental Facility together with IFC and what was the third part, World Bank, to develop a framework. What does investing in nature positive means? And they say there are 2 or 3 strategies. The first, do less harm. And do less harm can be done by working on a sectoral level. Invest with a positive, net positive impact on nature, then you have to take the landscape as your starting point if you really want to have a positive impact. And the third one is, do you work on system change? So more and more we see the front runners with the urgency of climate adaptation, the need to invest in green infrastructure, in the restoration of ecosystem services, moving in that direction. And what we try to do is to bridge it to all the work that has been done with landscape restoration, landscape management, and landscape finance. Maybe one last thing to say, we have been working also really hard on the concept of ecosystem services, and also on the monetary value of ecosystem services and how you can use this kind of data and information to improve investment decisions also on a landscape level. And maybe one last call for action. Don't wait with attracting the financial sector when your plans are ready. Start ex ante before you start working on a landscape plan to think about who is making a return on this landscape. Which financial institution already is making a financial return on this landscape, because they might be the ones to really attract for investing in the future. So ex ante, before you start, think about financial streams in and out your landscape. See if, and also invite financial institutions not to invest one by one, but to invest collectively, like you do with all the other stakeholders that need to come together for landscape restoration and landscape action. All have to be collective in the way they work. Also, the financial sector, don't go bilateral, talk to them one by one, but see if you can also bring them together in a collective strategy for the financing needs in your landscape. So that will be some of the reflections and insights that we have from our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Gustavo, obviously, this is very hard to do. Otherwise, all landscapes would be ideally have transitioned. We just heard that it's expensive. Sometimes it actually becomes a big barrier, the finance, to transition to regenerative approaches. So what are some of the big barriers that you see working at the landscape level, and what are the gaps that you see that prevent this change from happening, for action to actually come into effect?
Thank you, Vimo. Yeah, kind of making an echo of what Karen was saying, we see that landscape approach is gaining traction more and more, and we see these companies and different actors that are willing to invest and to engage in landscape actions. But what we see from RA is that there's a limited private sector commitment beyond the certification or regulatory requirements. And that's why we try to shift this conversation to make them start engaging in landscape actions beyond their supply chain. They see the certification as the primary sustainability tool regarding their Scope 3 emissions. And they also, what we see is that they see it as a very complex system, a very complex way to get in. So there's also a role in these organizations, RA or other different organizations, in making this work in like preaching about, okay, what does it mean for a company, for these actors to engage in landscape initiatives. And for them, and what we see is that they have much more easily to see how to measure their impact in their supply chain efforts, more than at the landscape level. And that's why also we try to bring the importance of data about how they can actually achieve impact at the landscape level, what the actions that they're doing. That's why I mentioned before landscape as a way to do it. And if they're gonna base their sourcing decisions in terms of sustainability and trying to identify what these landscapes, what landscapes are regenerative, it's very important for them to have this information and this data. And so yeah, so that's one of the first barriers that we see. It's the commitments are very limited at this moment. They just see these tools at the product farmer level. I think it's important for them to start trying to understand the complexity of what it makes to have impact at the landscape level. And a second other barrier that we see very often is about these gaps or this lack of understanding about how for the companies how to engage in these processes at the landscape level. What would be the benefits? Karen were mentioning that the approach that we have at this moment is about adaptation, about how they can mitigate these risks. We're talking about water scarcity, deforestation, but also social conflicts at the landscape level. And this is what we see that they're also shifting to. And so it's very important for these barriers about the understanding of how they can actually mitigate these risks, so we can actually influence their sourcing strategies. And also, I think it's very important, sometimes funding, it's almost as important as capacity building, in terms of what we see is that some of the landscapes struggle about having investable ready projects and how to pitch these landscapes to investors, to donors, to banks. So that's also very, very important and a big barrier that we have to work on in terms of how we can give all the tools and to make projects that are actually attractive for these actors.
Thank you, Gustavo. Let me come to you, and Andrea. You spoke about the economics. For farmers, it's about the economics. It's not just about contributing to climate action or regenerating landscapes. And you did also point to some of the challenges around concepts and frameworks. But what are farmers saying? What is it going to take for action to become effective at the landscape level, at farm levels, for this stakeholder group that you work with? What are they asking for that we need to, some of us that are working on these issues outside of the landscape, need to take into consideration when we push for and advocate for action on the ground?
Thanks very much. And yeah, please don't get me wrong. It is in farmer interest and the will to move to more sustainable space. And they are already doing different action and solution, and the landscape can be an interesting angle for them. Yet, what is holding back is a different combination of factor and barriers and gaps, as you frame it very, very correctly. First, there is a concern on the power imbalance in governance structure, because many regenerative agricultural initiatives today are funded and shaped by external actors, which sometimes farmers feel that are limiting in their decision-making power. So that means that there is this lack of safeguard. There is the concern that interest might be dominated by other actors that can sideline local leadership. So for us, there is a space of strengthening farmer representation in governance. There is unstable and short-term funding models, which also discourage farmers to the broader adoption, because again, let's not forget there are out there farmers that are already embarking in, name it, regenerative journey, climate smart agriculture adoption, but these are early adopters that for different combinations they find themselves in this space. But to do a major mainstream and breakthrough, that has been flagged. This instability and short-term farming models is what pushing a lot of farmers to not take this risk, which is considered too hard. And there's a need of looking at sustainable financing strategy that go beyond donor cycle, as well as blended finance and co-investing model that see farmer leading or at the center of funding mechanism. Another that has been flagged multiple times to us, to all the WFO, throughout all the WFO constituency, is weak market incentives for regenerative farmers. And let me frame it correctly, meaning that majority of the time has been reported to my attention that even if I embark with my community, with my landscape as a single farmer in a regenerative journey, my product cannot be recognized as different from a conventional product. And it's hard to be recognized unless it's framed inside a certification model, but farmers are not asking other imposition or other structure. So how we envision a branding that allows to recognize and pass this knowledge that goes from the community, the landscape, then to the consumer, that there is an added value on the effort that farmers are taking alone, and especially obviously alone in terms of the actor, but along with their community as social actor towards this path. So farmers will find it hard to transition unless they are assured that there will be either stable market access, maybe a price premium for their action, and hopefully with the private sector, a long-term supply chain commitment. There might be a move beyond the empty rhetoric and asking the private sector to actually invest in farmer-led regenerative value chain. Bureaucratic barriers to investment. This is an acronym that I learned when I was working in Nigeria. Bureaucratic and admin impediment are still there. Many farmers struggle to access subsidies. Carbon credit programs are more than a promise than a reality for majority of the farmers. Investment due to complex regulation and burdens are far from being easy to be accessed. Policy and structure must be simplified, transparent, and farmer-friendly. I cannot expect my farmers that they also need to get a PhD in finance to be able to ask for a loan. That is insane. And even farmers' organizations that can help on that, sometimes they might not be act as supporting on collateral the farmer, etc. Naming of collateral, that's very at the center also of the problem of the carbon credit and other situations, is the land tenure insecurity. Many small-sized farmers hesitate to invest in long-term regenerative practice because they have uncertainty on land rights. And that is an unsaying, still a non-mention. And maybe a landscape approach can see at the community level all that land, because we try to have the lens of the northern world of land tenure system based on rights and title, but that's not the case in several areas of the world where I had the pleasure and the honor to work side by side with the most remote farmer from Central and Southern Africa, from Central Asia, from Central and South America. It's a mixing system on land that I own, land that I rent, land is just community-based, land is assigned to a family. And there is unclarity on that, and some of the, especially the young farmers that have challenged to rent land, to use land, to have access to land, they flag even a very bizarre situation in which I don't feel myself to invest in a long term because I might get benefit on my land, and then the landowner will take it away from me and give it to rent to someone that can pay more. So that is even this incredible sad conjunction that can be. Last, and then sorry for taking a bit long time, is this lack of farmer-driven business model. So that again mean of investing in market-driven incentives, direct financing option, and fair compensation for ecosystem service, which again I don't want to sound too empty in this comment. I am an agronomist. I started study 20 plus somewhere. Let's not go down memory lane. Agro-ecosystem service was part of my study. 20 years plus later, still a recognition of the value of that is on the debate. Today, the only thing that we see is the carbon market, but it's attached to the ownership of the land and not the action. So it's a challenge on that. I conclude on this. There's been a very nice comment in the chat on not only thinking of landscape that looks at the rehabilitation, but also land abandonment of rural area. That's also for me something that needs to be done. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Andrea. Caroline, in 30 seconds, what can governments do? Because some of the points here, issues of land tenure, bureaucracies, they speak to the role of governments in creating or enabling the environment to facilitate support and the thriving of landscape partnerships, and for financing them to flow to the ground. What should we be looking at when we work with governments? You know, some of us, for example, working with the UN, what should we be doing on this issue?
and in 30 seconds or less would be wonderful. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll keep it very brief. Governments need political mandate. That's how democracies work. So we need a lot of political mandate, which is not the same in different countries. So it's not easy to give a general comment. I do think that see the front runners in the financial sector as your allies, or maybe bringing it higher on the political level. That would be my advice.
Great.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Sorry.
Thank you for that, Shannon. Sorry, we don't have enough time to talk about all these things. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we would love to keep this going, but we do have another panel. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten Dunlop of Climate Kick, who is going to moderate our next panel. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for a fascinating discussion. Really interesting kind of build from the ground up of the view that we now need to take. So I have the privilege of moderating a panel with 4 contributors. And at this point, looking outwards and broader, and although much of that's actually been in the discussion so far, starting to look at how do we take a global perspective on this, and particularly a global perspective around some of this really kind of core question on how do we make it possible for the idea of regenerative food systems and regenerative agriculture, and the idea of working with integrated approaches to landscape and land stewardship as kind of mutually entangled. How do we enable these two things to really feed one another, enable and see them as, if you like, two sides of the same coin? So it's my pleasure to introduce Stefania Avanzini from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Sarah Farley from the Rockefeller Foundation, and John Garcia Ulloa from BioVision. And I know Sarah Scher is going to be playing a role as well as somebody who's curated and really worked so very hard on the research report that is feeding into this whole inquiry and proposal, essentially, for thinking in an integrated way about food systems, agricultural, agri-food, and landscape views. So let me start with a question to each of you, or I'm going to put it to all of you, and then kind of whoever feels most inspired to jump in, please feel free to do so. And this is really what I would like to do is a kind of a why, what, how for this session. So let's start with, why do you think it is so valuable to connect landscapes and regenerative agriculture? And I know that in the context in which we're in, the whole framework of this session, that might sound like a question that's in the school of the bloody obvious, but I do think it's really important to unpack exactly why, what really is at stake here. So I'm going to throw open the floor from whoever would really like to start working there.
Hi, Kristen.
Stefania.
Maybe I can start so I can bring in the private sector perspective. First of all, of course, a warm thank you for having invited us. Very glad to be here. I'm Stefania Avanzini. I work for the World Business Council, so I represent the private sector, large private sector actors, and also very engaged in Region 10. So glad that we're having this conversation, and congratulations again also for the white paper publication to 1,000 landscapes. I think, and I want to ask even a first obvious question, I want to make sure that everyone understands it, is why are large agribusiness actors that actually don't even have that don't actually farm the land, why are they investing in agriculture, just as a full stop, and in regenerative agriculture? And I just want to make that everyone is clear, is it's for the resilience of their business. So they are seeing today higher risks on supply chain disruptions, higher risks on price volatility. So this is affecting their business. So it becomes quite often an important investment to make sure that we're investing in the resiliency of my value chains. And this also, of course, I think sheds us a light on the sense of urgency. When I say when large companies who are so far away from farms have understood the importance of investing in soil health, in bringing back nature and water capacity, and also the importance of farming livelihood, is that it's not too late, but it's almost too late. Like, the dangers are very visible. And why then landscape? Why are we taking a landscape or territorial approach? Is because it actually does not work elsewhere. Like, first of all, is because when we're trying to support farmers, or farmers actually driving their transition to regenerative farming practices, it's a whole on-farm approach. So they need all their off-takers to be aligned, and no single agribusiness, nor even the largest one, actually is an off-taker of the whole, if you're thinking about, especially an arable farm, of the whole crops. And so that's the first thing, we need to take a whole on-farm approach. And then when we're thinking about issues like water management, when we're thinking also about issues about how do we bring it, like leverage natures to bring back pollinators, these solutions actually only can be solved, or human rights can only be solved at the landscape level. So it's actually the territorial jurisdictional approach is the only approach forward. So I just wanted to echo, this is why it's so important, because it's the only level where we can have impact. I'll maybe pause here, and I'd love to hear colleagues' perspective on why they feel landscape approaches are so important.
I mean, you kicked it off beautifully, Stefania, and again, Sarah Farley here. So grateful to Sarah Shear and Kristen, John, and the team assembled to just bring to light all of this fabulous, rich data that has come from the 1,000 Landscapes effort and the broader Regen 10 network. I mean, Stefania, you set it up so well. Something I think perhaps in the 100 and some odd folks we have on this webinar, we take for granted is a slope on ecosystem service restoration that goes, from net zero downward toward degeneration, where we're destroying soil fertility, destroying biodiversity, water quality, and even the livelihoods and the ability of the farmers that Andrea spoke to so eloquently. The degenerative sort of template for industrialized agriculture has caused so many challenges. And even if we push for a sustainability agenda, we're really talking in the language of net zero. And I think the appeal, the why here is we need to get to net positive agriculture that makes more than it takes. It makes more soil health. It builds back biodiversity. It builds back the quality of life for producers, for their communities, for all inhabitants. We all live in a landscape, whether we know how to describe it or identify with it. We do indeed. And it's just so important, I think, that this quest for net positive is really what defines the future direction of all of our work in agriculture. So that's the why of regenerative, to get to net positive. The why of landscapes, I mean, you spoke to the things that we can't do, Stefania, if we don't take a landscape approach. I was also thinking about some of the special attributes of landscape approaches that I think don't come about if we fail to take a landscape approach. I think one of those is networks. When you take a landscape approach, you start to see networks form that straddle farmer groups, off-takers, government, finance, civil society. These are really hard, fraught, heterogeneous spaces to hold. It's why landscape partnerships take so long to really formalize and mature. But these networks are only possible, frankly, once we start to encompass the full totality of partners in place. I think the second thing, and from the very setup of this webinar, Sarah and many of the speakers have put this on the table so clearly, you see a learning and adaptation mode of work really proliferate. I look at groups like Pelham, and John has some wonderful recent experiences with them as well. But this is a group in East and Southern Africa, 13, 14 countries across the regions, that is really about peer-to-peer knowledge sharing for transmission of what works for ecosystem restoration, what works for regeneration and agroecology. And that kind of learning and adaptation is both dependent on a network and I think dependent upon the kind of inclusion that defines landscape partnerships. The last point I'll say, and this also does connect to private sector, but to many other markets as well, I think where landscape partnerships really mature, you start to see markets open up. There I look to Brazil. So you have this really smart basket of policy reforms aimed at incentivizing agroecological production and to serve public procurement. And in Brazil, school meals is linked to procurement at municipality levels. But all to say, once a jurisdiction like a municipality is actually thinking about its farmers, thinking about incentivizing production that is net positive, you start to see not only the ecological opportunities accrue, but the economic opportunities as well. So I'll stop there because I know we're moving, and I'm sure John has some great additions as well.
Thank you very much, Sarah. John, what's your take on this? Why does it matter so much to connect these two things?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Stefania, Sarah, Christina. It's a great setup, as Sarah said, on all the insights that you have already shared. I agree fully with them. Networks matter, as well. Social cohesion matters. And for me, I come from my background. I'm a biologist, so I come from originally from the conservation community, and now I fully work on food systems. When you talk to the conservation community on how to save a species, for example, that is in danger, what you want is that you want efforts, localized efforts that on the total, there is a cumulative effect, basically, that is saving a population of a species that is in danger. For me, sustainability transformation is basically the same. It's about those localized efforts that on the total are coming together and providing a benefit. If these efforts are too fragmented and too dispersed, you are not going to be able to see those effects immediately in the short term, or even in the communities where you are trying to, or where you are doing the support, basically. So for me, the landscape approach is a way as well to get those wins faster and quicker. For me, it's actually about efficiency too. And I think that's something that probably speaks to both Stefania and Sarah, coming from the business perspective, coming also for the philanthropic perspective. We want solutions that are efficient in terms of resource usage and in terms of investment. And from an agroecological perspective, territories and agroecology originates as a campesino movement. It's really about the actors that live in those territories and the vision that they want to achieve. So I think, again, that also comes with social cohesion, and is maybe now in the digital era, it's very easy to connect with people who are in other landscapes. But at the same time, when it comes to political action, when it comes to action, also with resources, you go to your neighbor, you go with to your family who is in the same city or is in the same landscape, and I think that's also part of this of what we want to see in the food system transformation. That is this connectivity, and that is this social empowerment, and that is a safety nets that are being constructed. And the digital era, yes, we may be able to connect with each other, but the safety net is not given if I'm just relating to a person who is in a complete different country or in a complete different landscape than me. So I think the social cohesion aspects are very important in a territorial approach. There are many other aspects I think that are super relevant and what I think territories or landscapes make sense. From an ecological perspective, definitely when you want to increase biodiversity outcomes of climate outputs, it's really about reaching that critical mass, or that tipping point that is shifting the system towards that upward sloped, or not that downward slope that Sarah was referring about. So for example, if you want to construct ecological corridors to connect protected areas or to protect areas important for biodiversity, you need to understand what are the areas that are in the landscape and what are the opportunities in land use planning that you could do to create those habitats that can connect those areas. So it really, from an ecological perspective, not just in conservation, but also in climate mitigation and adaptation, nutrient cycling, soil protection, runoffs, wetland protection, anything that you name on the environmental dimension is also important to consider this territorial perspective.
So it's really a question of, first of all, addressing the problems that we face at the scale at which they are presenting themselves, which is planetary, fully global, fully societal. So as you were saying, this kind of relationship between resilience and risk, but we're talking about global supply chains that affect kind of the whole capillary system of the planet. And how might this relationship between taking a landscape view, stewarding land as landscapes, and an ecological understanding of that, then produce this kind of race to the top that you're describing, Sarah. So we kind of flip the whole process of progressive degradation and really lift it up. So, okay, we've done this amazing depiction of why it is so advantageous, possible, interesting, value. It touches so many aspects of what we would need collectively as humanity to have food, have water, survive. What would it take to get this agenda to move? Because we also know that we are not making fantastic progress with this kind of approach at the order at which, of the scale at which climate change is presenting itself. So what do you, from your different perspectives, what would it take to move this forward? How, if you had to propose next steps, what would they be?
Yeah. I'm happy to kick this one off. I think, and even so far in this webinar, we have talked so much about the imperative of this agenda, but we haven't taken stock enough of how we've contributed to its limitation. And I think one of the things, and I find this particularly painful with colleagues and partners who I would see the work as landscape work, but the resistance is partly terminological, partly the fact that so much of the landscape work is cloaked in so much complex, yes, terminology, but insider jargon and thick process. And those things are really, really significant barriers to greater buy-in. And I think until that is really like dismantled, there's going to be a small niche that holds true to these incredibly imperative processes, and a lot of others who could definitively benefit who are going to say, sorry, you lost me at, the number of pages and the number of acronyms. So the simplification is really real. And I think even this paper has taken a big step forward in meeting that challenge, because it is hard. We are talking about complex adaptive systems. There's a point at which you bleach out the complexity. You're not accurately describing the phenomenon that we're really trying to wrestle down here. So this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I love the simplicity of the kind of 5 core elements, Sarah, that you and your team put forward. We're talking about building a partnership, fostering shared understanding of the landscape, forging a long-term holistic vision, a transition plan, getting the finance, and promoting the learning. I mean, that really, really lands quite clearly. But then you can break each of those pieces apart with toolkits, with other kinds of aids that can really make it digestible. That connects to a second thing that I think is a roadblock here, which is dissemination. Again, kind of thinking about the barrier to entry, the incredible amount of challenges every farmer around the world faces, not to mention all other landscape stewards. And if it wasn't challenging before, this particular moment, the global volatility that we've seen in a rather unparalleled fashion is going to make it more so. So I wondered, how are we using the tools available for faster dissemination? And one of the things I question is AI. There are predictions now that anything a human can do on a computer will be able to be done better, faster, more efficient, and more complete an answer within 2 to 3 years. If that's true, because of the doubling of Moore's law, and we recognize that ultimately the most powerful influencer for a farmer is another farmer. And I don't think that's actually ever going to change, because we're talking about connections to earth and soil and people. But for those first mover farmers, they are getting their knowledge from the frontier. They are using different tools. They are, in some instances, already using AI. So how do we think about how technology can unlock a kind of dissemination, distribution, adaptation, and use of big data models that right now I think we're just at the very edges of? Third, everybody has said it, and sitting in a funder space, I will wholeheartedly agree. We do need to change the time horizon of funder willingness to see results. If we expect to see landscape partnerships deliver results in 12-month timeframes, this is an unappealing road. If we're willing to take the longer time horizon, we'll talk about 20, 50 years for full landscape regeneration and transformation when we're talking about a seedling to a tree to fruit bearing to selling the fruit to eating the fruit, right? So we do need a new kind of patience, which connects to the fourth point, which is mindset. I think groups like COFSA, which is really thinking about the foundational mindsets and source of consciousness itself that we have to hold to do this work properly. That's good medicine for all of us who touch this, but I'm sure Stefania and John have additions.
Actually, I'd love to go to you next, Stefania. Is there a mechanism by which the awareness of systemic risk and resilience, kind of the quite proximate resiliency failures on food and water systems, could really drive a way of addressing understanding, awareness, a sense of urgency? What's your sense?
Oh, thank you, Kristen, for the question. First of all, I want to echo what Sarah was saying about the importance of peer-to-peer learning farmer network, and I agree. That is definitely when we're thinking about what needs to happen to move the agenda, like really unlocking that peer-to-peer learning is so important. And you were also referring to the fact, and I think it was Andrea from WHO saying, you know, a farmer that cannot have a PhD nor in data engineering and data collection, and so the importance of simplification of some of the data we want to that needs to be collected to underpin the business case and the investment case. I would say the most, when we're thinking about financial actors and businesses, we're here thinking about businesses as off-takers of, so buying the products that the farmers produce. I think the thing that would make them move is what I would call a solid investment case. So the importance of the economic returns that we're thinking, the fact that really elevating that more resilient farm models and landscapes actually have higher profitability, reduce costs of inputs, and ultimately, so there is a benefit also for the whole landscape and for the community, better water quality and water withholding capacity, and so there starts to be some emerging data, but I think that it needs just to be roughly right. We don't need everything fully fledged, but I think we're still sometimes lacking the ability to elevate that there is a positive investment case. That's
what about, just one question on that. One of the challenges I often observe is the time it takes to build the investment case when you're talking about complex transformations, and the time that climate change and climate risk is advancing are completely out of whack. So what's the counterfactual argument of the value at risk if we don't put in place something like this might drive a much faster unlocking of investment?
And I agree, and I know where you wanna take me. And some companies have actually started to map what is the cost of inaction, especially companies that are very dependent on perennials. They're like, if I don't do anything, how much will it impact my business? And actually, it has often shaken boards how much climate change will actually impact their business. Has it unlocked investments? Not yet. But I just also want to be very, very honest on that. But I agree that, for example, if Bloomberg tomorrow has a resilience model that actually shows how price volatility and actually integrates that resiliency factor and cost of inaction in some of the modeling, it would be extremely useful. And probably maybe another point to your point on, we can't wait. We need to have a roughly right investment case so that actors are around the table. And that's why a lot of the work that we're focusing on is on transition finance. I heard that we need to solve for both the transition finance and then the full market incentives and long-term model. But where a lot of actors, because they see the sense of urgency today, is there is strong focus on transition finance. So how can we also showcase to move it faster, that by investing collectively in a landscape transition, we're actually decreasing each other's individual transition cost. That is also coming again with economic lens, but it is also a very important factor here. And I think actually we published it just yesterday, a study that we did with some of our members, and it was led by Deloitte on how can we stack public and private incentives and really map where they are today to make sure, because if we're thinking about what is this solution, I think we should really work on is we need to bundle public and private incentives that incentivize farmers to transition, and as we need to bundle financial solutions that allow that reward farmers that are taking the step to shift their whole farming model. And so that is definitely very much needed. I call it a one-stop financing shop for farmers, and we see many some successes out there. So they're emerging, but definitely not at the scale that we need. I'll pause here because I
Thank
think
you.
we have a.
I'm going to pass
Yeah.
then John, to you for we've got a kind of a 1 minute left, but this bundling of ecological thinking, agricultural resiliency, and landscape thinking, what's your sense of what would be the recommendation or the way forward to really advance much faster?
Yeah, I think, thank you very much, Kristen. I think one of the key aspects is this coalition building. I think recommendation number 5 of the report is a really important one in supporting these processes. The second one, and I can't remember which recommendation it was, it's about this providing seed funding for grassroots organizations, farmer associations, and so on. And here it would be very interesting to know, for example, how is there an economic case for that or not? Probably not. But what is the correct, or what is not, maybe the word is not correct, but what is the right or the most appropriate funding mechanisms for those kind of interventions that are not necessarily linked to profits, or that are not necessarily linked to an economic gain. Let me talk about something else.
A little bit this kind of bundling of
yes,
elements,
exactly.
where one reinforces the other.
Yeah,
and maybe just let me talk. Us too. So I'm going to give you one more minute, John, and then we'll close.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Yes, I think another thing that is important to recognize is that we're talking about landscapes that they were homogeneous internally. And perhaps what we need to discuss is that there has to be different transitions within the same landscape. There may be some farmers that are more focusing, although there are smallholders that are focusing on local food systems. An agroecological transition for them would be great. But I don't think we can bring a cotton large farmer that is more interested into a regenerative transition, not necessarily an agroecological one, because of different constraints. So maybe we need to support these different types of transitions within the same landscape. I don't think many of my colleagues that work in agroecology will agree with me and probably find this as a very controversial take. But I do think that what is feasible is to recognize that different transitions need to happen within a same landscape. And the final thought, and I really want to say this because I find that this is something that I'm not sure if I agree fully with the report, and it's about shared visions. I think sometimes we invest so much time, resources into developing a shared vision, and it's so difficult to just agree on what the end point of a landscape should be. And maybe sometimes what we need to agree is what is the next 2 steps that enable all of our different visions, not necessarily, because can we really get to a point where we all agree on the same vision of a landscape, of all landscape actors can agree on the same vision for that landscape? Maybe what we need to agree is on the process. What are the next 3 steps that will enable all of these different visions to still be a reality? I think that perhaps is a different way.
Powerful, actually. So then we make a quick connection, this idea of working with variegated needs and contexts. And this is where I would connect to what you're saying, Sarah, about AI, where really we do have tools to start working with multiple-sided tracks, but very important that I want to make a connection to a conversation yesterday, actually, on radical collaboration, which was about the fallacy of assuming that you have to all agree on the end state. Actually have to agree about the co-benefit of working together as steps in a process, and don't waste too much time around the end state. Okay, thank you so much. This is a kind of conversation we could have for the next 5 hours. I appreciate your making an effort to bring such rich content in a short time. Shannon, I'm passing back to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kirsten and John, Sarah, Stefania, everyone. I'm going to pass it to Bemi quickly to close out with just a few reflections and what we can expect for next steps. Bemi, over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. Can you hear me okay? Oh, perfect, because it was misbehaving earlier. Keep me on time because I heard a lot of very rich things, and we will continue to reflect and share out. So it's been really invigorating to hear from all the panelists and presenters today. Some of the themes we heard from our rich discussions and the chat, we've been compiling here, so I will do my best to share out what we heard. So some of the themes. So first, we heard about mindsets as a key lever for change and connecting this to landscape partners, which are different across landscapes and within landscapes, integrating goals at the landscape scale, including seascapes, agriculture, other land uses, local and global streams, natural systems, etc. Second, we heard about the importance of organizing collaboratively, and I really appreciate what John just said about agreeing on the process. So the co-benefit of the next 2 steps versus the end state. That was really thought-provoking. Thank you. And thinking about centering livelihoods, decision-making, and perspective of farmers and other local stakeholders must be central to the landscape agenda. And these types of collaborations build social cohesion as well as landscape regeneration. We also heard there's a need for trusted data at the landscape level for partners and investors to make decisions. It's hard to have investable ready projects. This underscores the need for data governance principles, which Region 10's been working on, as well as thinking about the cost of transition to regenerative agriculture and landscapes. Also moving along, we heard about moving from the degenerative template and given the impacts of climate change, needing to consider resilience value chains and landscapes. Further, if you want to go further than do less harm and pivot to being more, to being nature positive, you need to have a landscape approach. And finally, I'm at time, so I'll finish up with a final theme as we discussed possible actions to move this agenda forward together towards net positive, such as the simplification of our language is important to consider to make this more accessible and collective while resisting co-optation, creative long-term funding mechanisms, considering bundling and stacking strategies, supportive public policy and planning, coalition building models, we heard a lot, network approaches, peer-to-peer learning came up, technology and more. So I hope these things resonate with some of what you've heard. We'll continue to reflect on these. We want to thank everyone who's been a part of the webinar today, and the moderators, panelists, facilitators, fellow co-authors. We are grateful for our 1000L and Region 10 colleagues and funders supporting this work, highlighting Rockefeller, IKEA, McKnight, and Loudest Foundations. We really appreciate your time, energy, leadership, and knowledge today. As I said, we'll be following up afterwards with resources that detail next steps for different actors, opportunity for additional reflections we'll share out in a communication as well, and an evaluation form that we hope will continue to generate ideas and reflections for next steps, dialogue. And with that, a minute over. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And we bring this webinar to a close. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Super impressive.
Bye.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you.